Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Glad to be back.
Today we're tackling a word that I think we've all encountered at some point, maybe in an argument or just in life.
Hmm.
That word is moot.
Okay.
So we actually pulled a legal definition for this one just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Sounds good.
And it says, deprived of practical significance, typically by the occurrence of some event.
Interesting.
Yeah, so basically something becomes moot when it's no longer relevant or worth debating.
Right, right.
And it's funny, we got a ton of questions from you all about this idea of mootness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they're really thought-provoking. So we're going to kind of use those questions as a springboard for our deep dive today.
I like that.
So to kick things off, let's just jump right into this first question, all right?
Let's do it.
So when does a debate become moot? Like, is there ever a point where it's just not worth having anymore?
That's a great question, especially these days. We're constantly bombarded with information and opinions.
True.
And I think a debate loses its value, becomes moot, when the potential for real exchange disappears. When people stop listening to each other, when they're not actually engaging with the other side's viewpoint.
Right, they're not even trying to see where the other person's coming from.
Exactly. And it almost becomes like two ships passing in the night, just two monologues happening at the same time instead of an actual conversation.
Yeah, like two boxers shadowboxing, each in their own world.
Exactly. And sometimes I think recognizing that a debate has become moot is a sign of maturity, intellectual maturity, I mean.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because it allows us to, step back and say, okay, this isn't going anywhere productive. Let's focus our energy on something else.
So it's about recognizing when a conversation has run its course.
Exactly.
Okay. So moving on to another question we got. This one's really fascinating to me.
Okay.
It's about hypothetical situations. So can hypothetical scenarios actually prepare us for real life situations?
Well, I think hypotheticals can be incredibly helpful in some ways. They let us kind of play out different possibilities in our minds.
Right.
And we can test our assumptions, practice how we might react in certain situations. It's like a pilot using a flight simulator.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, it's not the real deal, of course, but it can still be valuable training.
But, you also brought up some potential downsides to over-relying on hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the problem is that life is unpredictable, right? And if we get too caught up in these imagined scenarios, we might be blindsided when things don't go according to plan.
So it's like we're preparing for a very specific fight, but then a completely different opponent shows up.
Exactly. And then we're left scrambling because we haven't developed the flexibility to adapt to the unexpected.
So in a way, over-preparing for specific scenarios can actually make us less prepared for the real world.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a risk of that. It can give us this false sense of security, like we've got it all figured out.
When in reality, we've just narrowed our focus too much.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. One of the questions that really got me thinking was about how we decide what really matters.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. So how do we, both as individuals and as a society, determine what's truly important?
Well, from a societal standpoint, I think it often comes down to a kind of balancing act. Balancing our survival as a group with individual freedoms.
Right.
So we tend to prioritize things like health, safety, cooperation, those kinds of things. But at the same time, we also want to protect individual rights and liberties.
So it's constantly evolving based on all these factors.
Exactly. Our history, our environment, our understanding of the world, it all plays a role.
Okay, so what about on a more personal level? How do we figure out what matters most to us as individuals?
I think our personal values are often shaped by our experiences.
Makes
Like
sense.
the relationships we have, the challenges we face, the moments of joy and sorrow we go through, it all contributes to shaping our sense of what's truly important.
So for some people, it might be family and connection, while for others, it might be something like creativity or pursuing knowledge.
Exactly. And sometimes those personal values might even clash with societal values.
That's true.
And figuring out how to navigate those tensions, that's a big part of being human.
So speaking of navigating tensions and changing perspectives, your last question was really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
You asked if we'd ever changed our minds about something we were once passionate about.
Well, I actually have a personal experience with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I used to be really passionate about art. Like, I spent hours drawing, painting, experimenting with different mediums, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, so you were really dedicated.
I was. But as I went along, I started running into some roadblocks, my skills kind of plateaued, and then I got diagnosed with color blindness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that presented some pretty big challenges for me as an artist.
I can imagine.
It felt like my dream was becoming, well, moot.
That must have been really tough to deal with.
It was. But here's the interesting thing. Even though I ultimately ended up pursuing a different path, that intrinsic desire to create, it never really went away.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I still find myself doodling in notebooks, sketching ideas, that kind of thing.
So you still find ways to express that creative urge.
Exactly. I've accepted that art might not be my career, but it's still something I enjoy doing for myself.
So it's like, even though the external circumstances changed, that internal motivation is still there.
Exactly. And it reminds us that sometimes the most rewarding things in life are the things we do simply because we love them.
Not for any external validation or outcome.
Precisely.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored how debates can become moot, how hypothetical scenarios can both prepare us and limit us, and how personal values shape our choices.
It's been a great conversation.
It has. And before we wrap up, I wanted to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Sounds good.
What are some things you're passionate about? Maybe activities or interests that seem, well, moot to others, but they bring you joy and fulfillment. What are those things for you? And how do they enrich your life? Maybe there's a hidden wellspring of meaning waiting to be discovered in those often overlooked parts of your world.
That's a great question to ponder.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.
Take care.